just going to open up the Thunkable environment. So this is the Thunkable app. If you're just starting out, you'll go to thunkable.com and you will probably see a blank screen here. And then you'll just eventually, once you register or get an account, you can come here and then just basically say create a new app. And I'm going to call this the Empathy app. And you can change the name later, so don't worry too much about that part. Okay, and then you're kind of left with this blank screen. What I'm showing on the right, Tara, is this is my iPad, and I'm projecting it onto my computer screen. So this is actually showing whatever app, once I start building app, this will show whatever app I'm running.
Cool.
What's called Thunkable Live is what you need to download on either your iPad or your iPhone or your Android. Go to the App Store and download what's called Thunkable Live. Okay, so first thing we want to do, I think, is draw the first screen. And so what do you think would be on the main screen?
I think, like you said, right, like what's the one main important screen? So it's not thinking chronologically how your experience is, but what's the most important one? So I wanted to build an app that could help you put yourself in the shoes of another person, and maybe through simple pictures and imagery, you're put into a scenario where you feel something.
Just from what your description is, I think probably having an image or a video, that will change, of course, as we go through different parts of the scenario, and then maybe a row of at least for our first shot, maybe a row of buttons.
Yep, just maybe 1-2 buttons, right?
Yeah, and the user chooses one or the other.
Right, and it says some certain things, preset things.
That's good. Okay, so yeah, let's do some just an initial design of that. In Thunkable, there's one image component, so I'm going to drag one of those in, and it doesn't look like much until you actually put a picture in. So
I can find
Tara, maybe as I'm going through this, maybe find an image and you can.
Yeah, I'll find an image. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you kind of want to put an image in, and then I think we'll probably have some text as well, which might describe what's happening. So I'm going to go up and grab what's called a label component. And so this is just kind of text that, the user doesn't put stuff in here, but it's just text that the code puts in. So like, for instance, this might be, how would you respond to this, something like that. We can change that later, but some kind of question like that, right? And then what I'm going to do is grab what's called a row, and this is just for layout. So I'm going to, over here on the left is kind of all the components that Thunkable has, and I grab the image from an image drawer, and then the user interface has labels and buttons, right? But I'm going to grab what's called a row. And this is just so I can put things kind of side by side. And I want the row to be.
And that I learned was not obvious, because I thought row would be up and down, but it becomes side by side.
Yeah. It's so the things you put in here will end up side by side. Yeah, and it's not intuitive that's how it would be. But so I'm going to have this row, and then I'll just put a couple buttons in, and it's a little tricky. You got to make sure it goes inside there. And I think it did. And then let's add one more. And so then I've got a couple buttons. Okay, and let's just for now, I'm just going to put like yes and no, and then we'll change that as we think a little more. And there it is. And I can, we can mess around with the layout here. Like for instance, I don't like this height, so I'm going to do relative size. And what relative size means is, every component is within some enclosed thing. So like this image and this text and these buttons are actually part of a row, And these guys, their parent or their enclosure is the whole screen. So when I say relative size and I say like 50%, I'm saying relative to the screen, I want this image to be 50%. And you always want to use these percentages instead of actual pixels, because then your app will work on whether you run on iPhone or iPad, right? So that's what you want to do.
That's helpful.
And I don't know, let's make our width a little different. Okay, that's looking a little bit better.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we've kind of got, a first shot at the app, and let me just show it on our screen. And there we go.
Yep. There we go. Cool.
Okay. Cool. So we're doing pretty good. So this is an actual app running. Anyway, that's a first run at it. I think what I want to do is I'm going to change this row, and I'm going to give it also a height. And I'm just going to say it's relative size 10%. And when I do that, it also kind of gets it up closer to the picture and the text. And so there's basically two tabs, right? The design tab is where you kind of show how things will look. And then the blocks tab is where you do like the interactive behavior and where you get your data and bring it into the app as well. For instance, I could come over here and I could say, okay, this guy is named the yes button. Give it a descriptive name. Because all these components in my app, they're going to show up in my blocks editor over here. But what I want to do is I'm going to create a variable. And, I was talking earlier, these variables are kind of like your hidden data. Think of them like a spreadsheet behind the scenes of the app. You can show the data in your app, but it's not by default shown. Okay, so I'm just going to call this our pictures. Okay, and I'm going to make it a list. Okay, and this list thing right now by default it's just got numbers in the list, but I don't want to put numbers. Okay, and I can say how many things there's going to be. I'm going to start my list off with just one item, but later we'll add more items, like when we get the next parts of the scenario, when we go to the next pictures or whatnot. So I'm going to make this list of one item, and the item is just going to be the name of your picture. So I got to go back over here, and let's see.
I see.
The image is taraart.png, and you got to get this name exactly. Okay, so I see the A is capitalized, so I'm going to say over here taraart.png. Okay, this is not changing my app at all yet. Okay, but what I'm going to do is when my screen opens, okay, so these yellow blocks are called event handlers. And what it says is, whenever the screen opens, what do you want to happen? Okay, and what I want to happen is I want my image, and right now, by default, it just put in taraart.png, which would work, right? If I rerun my app, it's going to work exactly the same, but it's going to be coming from the data. But I don't want to say taraart. What I want to do is I want to grab the first item from my list. So we got to think abstractly, right? If we have a bunch of items, the first time we're going to want to grab the first thing from the list. The second time, the second thing. This is a little confusing because the default has like a default list. When I drag this out from the list block and I grab this get block, okay, and it had this default list. What I want to grab from is this pictures list. Okay, and it's a little bit abstract. I can't just grab it from here. I've got to go over to variables, and I've got this thing which is a reference to it. notice it says app pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So this is basically a reference to that
Oh,
variable.
I see.
Okay. And what I want it to do is to get the first item in my list. Now my app is working, but now it's using the list and it's getting the first item and showing it. Okay. I could also change my label. Remember, I've got this label that says,
Right.
by default, how would you respond?
Also, now this can be the variable.
That's good. Yeah, that's right. So I can grab label.text, and instead of having some fixed text in here,
It's list words spoken.
yeah, good. I'll
Because then
grab,
you're going through number 1, number 2. I see.
and notice I don't want the pictures list. I want
Right.
the word spoken list.
Very cool. Okay.
Okay, and now if you notice over in our screen, it's now showing how does this picture make you feel?
Yep. No change.
Okay. So it's the nice,
No,
one
no, no,
nice thing
no.
about
It
Thunkable.
changed. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you do stuff, you can see if it's working
Right.
right off the bat. Okay, let's just do a little more technical part before we move on to the next thing. So this is all cool for, I'm showing the first picture, but let's just add a second item to each of these lists. So Tara, maybe just find another picture.
I did. Yeah.
Oh,
It's in the chat box.
okay, cool.
It's scary.
Oh, that is scary. Yeah. You got some scary stuff here. So I'm just gonna do save image as, and I'm gonna call it Tara Pick 2. I would probably call these with better names to describe what they are.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can come up with a description for this one right now.
I know.
Okay, so then I want to go back to design, and I don't want to set some particular thing to that picture, but I can also just add to my files here, and I can even drag it here. So there it is. So I'm gonna just drag this in over here, and basically what I'm doing is I'm just adding it to all the files of my app. Okay, so now if I go back to my blocks, I'm gonna make my picture list bigger.
Oh, so you got to manually do this and
I gotta
build
manually do
your
it,
list.
and I've
Yeah,
gotta remember what that thing was called.
I see.
Okay, so now we've got 2 pictures, and I'm just gonna add another text item to correspond. Just something different, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll also make it show the second item. Okay, and
Oh, okay. Yeah.
sorry, let me show my screen again. And notice it's showing both the
Yep.
second picture and the second piece of text. But then let's just go back to our design, and let's just add a button. Let's not worry about how it looks too much right now, but we'll just call this the next button.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to happen is when I click next, it'll go from the first to the second picture. I want to actually name my component, so that way when I'm in the blocks, I can find it easily. Okay, so I'm going to go to the blocks. When the screen opens, I want to do this, and then when the next button is clicked, I want to do something different. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky, a little bit sophisticated. Your first thought is, well, when the next button's clicked, show the second picture and the second text. So let's just do a bad solution, not a bad solution, but a solution that's not going to hold up very well. Okay, and I could change these to 2.
I see.
Okay.
But you want to actually have some sort of code that says when this go +1 or something like that, right?
Yeah, the +1. Yeah, we really need to have a variable,
right,
which is called an index.
I see.
And we'll just increment that index as we go.
I see.
Okay, but I like to just kind of go step by step. When my app opens up and it's showing over here, and I'm showing the screen here on the right, which is my iPad. Now, if I touch the next button, okay, but Tara brought up a really important part, which is this is cool, but now every time I click next, it's not going to change. It's always going to show the second picture.
Right.
And really what I want to do is show the next item.
Right.
Okay, and the way we do that is we create an index variable. So it's another variable behind the scenes, and I'll actually call it index. Another word you could think of is position, right? It's the position you're at in the list. And I'm going to come over and bring a 1. So it's going to start out as 1. So and this is really abstract. You've got to kind of envision this number that you don't see in the app, right? But it's going to be changing behind the scenes. All right, and instead of when the screen opens doing the first one, I could leave it 1, but I'm going to instead say, no, I want to get a reference to index and use that.
And then when it opens, then
or when they click next,
when they click
what I
next,
want to do is make index 1 more than it is.
Yeah, +1.
And so I need +1. And so the way you do that is you have to grab a set block. So set means change. All right, and notice there's only one set block. There's not one for every variable, so I have to grab it first. And I'll change it with this little triangle to index.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Okay, it's a little tricky, right? There's a bunch of, you can refer to a variable, but if you want to change a variable, you've got to grab one of these guys.
I see.
And I could have grabbed the change block, but I'm just going to use a set block. And what I want to set it to is itself
right
+1. And this is
I see.
This is a big conceptual step for beginners because it's a little weird, right? You're basically saying, I want to change the index to its old value,
right,
+1. So I'm going to increment my index, and I got to remember, I don't want to show the second thing.
Right.
I want to show the indexed thing.
Yep.
Okay. And one thing I tell my students or repeat over and over is, what you need to understand what the indexed item means. And what it means is, instead of grabbing the first or the second, I'm going to grab whatever is in this variable. I mean, this variable is going to start off as 1, then it'll be 2, then, as we add more things, 3, 4, 5. But this is saying, get me the indexed item. Okay, let me just.
So this is helpful even for any app, actually, where like it goes back to the point about not having so many screens.
Yes, exactly.
So,
yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So if you're thinking about changing the background image, that becomes your list.
Yeah.
You change it, and then you have, instead of saying, okay, here's my intro screen, here's my.
Yes. Yes. So you're right. Instead of having like fixed screens, you've got this one screen, you've got this data behind the scenes, and then you use this variable to keep track of where you're at in this data, and you just kind of increase it as you go.
Right.
And this is very common code in any kind of app, right? Is you've got a list of data and you want to walk through it. Okay, so right now we're pretty close to having this interactive part working. And I'm over here on my screen again. I'm going to touch next, and it gives me the second one. And then, Tara, what do you think is going to happen when I touch next again?
It's going to stay because there's no number 3.
Yeah, the problem, I don't know what Thunkable will do. Let's see if it gives me an error. Yeah, undefined. I don't know if you can see that.
Because it couldn't find number 3.
Right, we don't have a number 3. So there's a couple things we could do. One of them is, well, let's just wrap around when we get to the end and show the first picture.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is grab a if statement. So these are how you can kind of ask questions.
Right.
And I'm going to pull that
I see.
out. And what I want to ask is kind of a logic question is, if my index And I'll actually say if it's greater than 2.
So is there a way to check the length of the list automatically?
Yeah, good. So that's really what we want to put there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you jumped ahead on me, but that's a good. I'm glad you did. That's exactly what we want to do. So, kind of more concretely, once we get bigger than 2, we want to go back to the first one, right? So I'm going to say, I just need to grab a 1. So let's grab this guy. Okay, so what this means is when they click next, add 1 to our position, to our index. So if it was 1, it becomes 2. If it's 2, it becomes 3.
Yep.
The first, if it's 1 becomes 2, that's great. But if it's 2 and becomes 3, we got an error, right? But now
Yep.
we're going to say, well, if it's bigger than 2, set it back to the first picture.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so just to run this to show you it works, I'm going to click next. Now index is 2. You
Yep.
can't see the index, right? It's a hidden variable, but it's 2 and it's showing the second one. And when I click next again, index is going to become 3 for a second. But before we try to show a bad picture or show the third picture that doesn't exist, it'll go back to 1 and we'll be cool. So I'll click next again. And now we're back in the
Yep.
first picture. And I can
Yep.
just keep going, right?
Yep.
Okay, I want to just go back to what you said though, Tara. This 2, the only thing bad with it is if I change my list
Yep.
and add more items, this code
Yep.
won't work.
Yep. Yep.
So you're absolutely right. I don't want to say 2. I want to be more abstract. And I want to go over to the list drawer again. And notice there's this length of block.
Oh.
And I'll drag that in, get rid of that. And I want to take the length. These lists are going to be the same, right? Or the same size. And so I'm just going to grab a reference to pictures.
I see.
So right now, what I just did, changing this from 2 to length of, the app works exactly the same. But now,
Yep.
if I change my data and add more items, it'll still work.
I see. Yep.
If you want to give the user some choices, one way to do it is to have a list viewer. And I'm going to go grab one from the user interface area, and I could stick that down. So we'll bring this down lower. And it's a little tricky sometimes to move things, but I'm just going to do my best here. And I'm going to move the row above it.
Oh, cool.
Okay. And so now I've got this thing where I could put some items. We might want to get rid of this row and instead have this list viewer. Okay. And the way list viewers work, they're not too difficult to use. But if we go over to our blocks, what I'm going to do is create a new variable, and I'm just going to call it like choices. And then I can give it some actual choices.
I see.
Okay. And I don't know what we might put in here, learn, maybe. And I'm just going to Command C and Command V to copy that. And then I'll say, yeah, for now, let's pretend the choices are always the same no matter what the screen is. And the way you kind of stick these choices into my list viewer, and what I do is I grab my list viewer, and there's this thing called set text items. And it basically means the text items are the items you want to show up. And I want the choices to show up. The user can choose one of these items, and we can do something depending on their choice.
I see. So how does the user click on them? Like, we didn't code anything in there.
Right, good. So let's just say we wanted to code something for when they choose something. I can go over to list viewer and there's this item click event.
Oh, I see.
And so pretty straightforward. And I can do whatever I want when they click an item. When they click an item, let's just go to the first picture no matter what. So this is how I decide which one they've chosen. So whenever you have an event, these are called event parameters, and they'll
Uh-huh.
tell you, information about that event. And in this case, the item is the actual text they chose. Like it could be, I don't like that idea, or this makes me sad. And the index is the position they chose. And when the user actually clicks it, it's kind of like Thunkable is telling the coder, telling you this information, and you can do something with it.
Oh,
So,
I see.
so for instance, let's say instead of always showing the first one, depending on what they chose,
I
so I
see.
could put index here, and this would make a little more sense if I said go to 1, go to 2, and this, sorry, I'm ruining our empathy, what we want to make choices, but the fact that this text is this doesn't really matter, but this is what's really going to happen now, right? So if I touch the second item in my list viewer,
It'll show up.
it'll show the second picture.
So we could also do it where if you choose your particular go-to, it shows you some text, right?
Yeah, good. Let's go back to the designer. I want to grab a new label and
Right.
stick it in here. And I'll put the list viewer above there. And so this label is where we're going to put response text. In my blocks, depending on what they chose, instead of changing the picture, what we want to do is change the label.
Yep.
All right. And so, right off the bat, let me go ahead and rename the label down there so I don't get confused. I'm going to call this response label. And if I go back to my blocks, then I can say I want to set the response label to something.
Can we make this a list too?
Yeah, we can do that. Like we could have a list of the possible responses.
Yeah. And so then can we map it where the entry number 2 is mapped to response number 3? How do we do that?
Yeah, good. So let's grab another variable. And then this is probably going to be something like in response to what the user chose, right?
Yes.
And for now, I'm just going to say, okay, response 1.
Yep.
Response 2.
Right.
And then what we want to do now is we want to use that index again. We want to grab something from this list. And remember, the way we grab stuff is with this in-list get operation. This is a fundamental, it takes a while to get used to, but you'll use this block a lot. And it basically says, for some list, get me some item. Okay, so I'll just copy this for now. And what I don't want to use app index. I want to use what the user chose. So this green index. And I want to use the list called responses.
Responses, right.
So just to show that this thing works, or let's hope it works. But if I go back to my app, if I hit that first choice, it should show me response 1 in that bottom text at the bottom. So now if I touch the first item in my list viewer, it shows response 1 at the bottom. If I touch the second one, it shows response 2 and then response.
I see.
But essentially,
Cool.
this is how you do different things based on which item the user chose in the list viewer.
That's very cool. Dave, this is awesome.
Yeah, no, I think this is really good. I love your questions and interjections. I think it's really nice. It makes me think of stuff that I just don't, I've been
Yeah,
doing it
no,
so
totally,
long.
totally. And I think it's so much more less painful than to try to struggle through.
Yes,
And
the motivation level goes out the roof.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
then they're ready to make that leap. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Cool. Thanks, Dave. This
Yeah,
is
it was fun,
awesome.
Tara. Really
Okay,
fun.
bye.
Bye.